Okay, good morning. My name is Mikkel Adgate. I am with the Department of Environmental Protection with our Public Affairs and Communications team, and we're very excited to welcome all of you back to our second Sustainable Rate Structure Analysis Stakeholder Advisory Group, which is a mouthful, I know, but essentially we are looking forward to keeping all of you updated as we go through our sustainable rate structure analysis. Thank you to those of you who are able to join our first meeting earlier this year. We have a lot of exciting updates on the study. We're looking forward to a robust discussion with all of you. There are several folks from DEP on the meeting today who will be happy to answer questions and to facilitate discussion as we go through. Miranda, can you go over to the next slide? Just to give a sense of our agenda, I'm seeing Angela, are you on yet? I know we're having some technical difficulties.
Oh. Yes, I'm on.
Hey, Angela, good morning.
Good morning.
We're just walking through the agenda. So for folks who have not yet met Angela, she is our Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Sustainability. So she'll be giving a little update on our IDA response. I will be updating folks on our new billing system, which launched earlier this year. And then we'll kick it over to Erin to really go through the meat of the meeting, which is an update on our comparative rate structure analysis report. Then Alan Cohn is joining us for an update on One Water NYC, and then we'll go through some next steps. So just a couple of meeting logistics. Everyone is muted at the moment, but you are welcome to put questions into the chat that we can go through as we go along. And we will also have some time for questions at the end. So Angela, feel free to kick us off.
Okay, thank you so much, Mikkel, and my apologies for not being on camera yet. I will be in just a few moments. I had an unexpected vet visit this morning, and it was important for me to participate. So apologies for not being on the camera yet, but I will be. This study is so important to the DEP for various reasons. But to start, we'd like to emphasize the mayor's IDA response. Really and truly, it is the mayor's response to our new normal levels of precipitation. We have seen our share of rain this season. We have broken many records while we're watching those in the West break their own records for extreme drought. So these evolutionary changes in our climate have us thinking really hard about our rate structures and our ability to fund the system, to really be visionary with respect to the system's future needs. So that's really the correlation with this work and with our rates. Always knew that there would be, or that there is, the flip side to the coin of storm surges and coastal flooding, right? So we're always looking at the sea level rise issues and the issues associated with flooding from the water surrounding the city. But at the same time, the other side of the coin is these extreme precipitation events and the havoc that they wreak on our drainage system, the capacity of our land to absorb that rainwater. So we believe we really must make ourselves more pervious. We really need to be thinking about how to do some more sustainable stormwater management as close to the source as possible, not believing that we can necessarily build our pipe system big enough to handle these extreme events. So where that leaves us is that the mayor has programmed an additional $2.7 billion for extreme precip precipitation investments. And the department will be looking at a variety of tools to add to our toolbox to address these issues. And one of our most exciting endeavors will be our neighborhood scale stormwater strategies, or what we're calling cloudbursts strategies. And that is a term that we borrowed from our Danish friends because they experience these type of events as well. And they really introduced us to these concepts. So we will also be looking at some tried and true gray infrastructure, such as high level storm sewers, which would take the street runoff. So that's about 50% of the rainwater off the network, out of the common pipe and into a separate pipe dedicated for that runoff. And then we will be looking at what type of rate structures might be available to us that would look at fees. I don't want to necessarily term them fees or taxes or anything like that, but it would be a revenue stream that would be targeted and related to individual properties and their perviousness or their ability to manage their stormwater, so that we would hopefully, through a system such as that, incentivize people to soften their properties, or we would charge them a greater amount to have to deal with it at a common level. So that is all I had to say, just for the introduction. And I would like to now turn it over to Michael Deloche, who is going to continue. Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to be Mikkel Adgate. That's a surprise.
No worries, Angela. We try to keep you on your toes with random surprise guest spots. As Angela mentioned, we wanted to give an update on our new billing system, which launched on September 7th. Many of you might be aware of the fact that we've been working on this new billing system for a couple of years now. It was a partnership between our bureaus of customer service and information technology to launch a really state-of-the-art system based on industry best practices of utilities across the country. The project is really one of the largest technology projects in the history of the agency, because it prioritized not only an easy to read or easier to read paper bill design, but also a new and improved My DEP account online portal. So that means that whether folks are still getting a paper bill or they're using our online system, there's more modernized functionalities, it's easier to read, and there's a lot of synergies across the agency because of this updated billing system. And the reason why it's relevant for our sustainable rate structure study comes to the fact that our previous system really didn't allow for any changes to our existing rate structure. And for those of you who have been in dialogue with us about the agency's rate structure for some time, you might remember that we would say that one of the hindrances was the fact that our older billing system didn't quite have the functionality that would be needed for an updated rate structure. And so, by conducting this massive investment, by launching last month, it really does set us up nicely once the final recommendations from the rate structure study are complete, and once we sort of enter discussions with the water board, so that we're in a place to think about how a rate structure or revised rate structure could actually be implemented for our customers. So we really see this as, building on the success of our Bureau of Customer Services. You might be aware that they are an award-winning group in terms of the great customer service that we provide. And this bill will just continue to sort of launch us into the next era of technology and implementation. So we're very excited for that. Again, if there's any questions about the billing system, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can circle back to them later. And at this point, I want to kick it back to Erin to go through the update on the rate structure study.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mikkel. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Erin Morey with the Bureau of Environmental Planning and Analysis. I'm very happy to be here today to present on the comparative rate structure analysis report. And just a reminder, the full report is available on our website. So we encourage everyone to take a look, to read through it. If you've had a chance to review some of it before today's meeting, that's great. And we're happy to answer questions, address any comments, but we'll also have opportunity after this meeting to do so in future advisory group meetings. And also you can always reach out to us through email. We'll be happy to talk through any of your comments or questions on the report. And we'll also share a link to the report at the end of today's presentation. Also, I just want to note that the report is quite detailed. For those of you who have taken a look, that's probably not news for you. So we won't be covering all the details today. It'll be more broad strokes and takeaways and key details from each utility that we looked at. But again, we can continue this conversation at future advisory group meetings. We definitely want your input on the findings of the report. And before I begin, I just wanted to mention too that we have a few folks on the line today from our consultant team. These folks are our technical lead for the study. So we have Andy Burnham, Dave Hyder, Deb Kleckner from Stantec, and also Janet Clements from Corona Consulting. So they are on hand to assist with answering questions and addressing comments during the Q&A as well. Okay, next slide, please, Miranda. All right, so before we get into the comparative trends analysis, just a very brief recap of the kickoff meeting, especially for those who were unable to attend. So we kicked off our 3-year sustainable rate structure analysis in August of 2020, and we held our first kickoff stakeholder group meeting in July of 2021, so just a few months ago. And as I mentioned, in that time, since we met in July, we've actually completed the comparative rate structure analysis report as mentioned. And the other thing that I wanted to mention too is that we did develop some FAQs based on the feedback from the first advisory group meeting. And so those FAQs are available on our website as well. And we will be continually updating these FAQs at the conclusion of each meeting. So it'll be sort of a running tally of the comments and questions that we received throughout the study. So stay tuned for the next update of the FAQs following this meeting. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so, and just a very brief overview too of the SRSA schedule as a reminder. So this may continue to shift as the study progresses, like any of our studies. You'll note that we are close to finishing task 3, which is revenue requirements analysis. And just as a reminder, the objective of this task is to forecast our revenue requirements for the next 20 years by 3 systems, and those are water, sewer, and stormwater. And so the rate structure options that we're going to eventually study under task 4 require this identification of those revenue requirements. So after this task 3, the revenue requirements is complete, we'll be able to do financial forecasting in a model to study those rate structure options under task 4. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so getting into the comparative analysis report with some overview and objectives. So the comparative analysis report studies the rate structures, the rate implementation options, so how you go about implementing a rate, and the customer affordability programming and lessons learned from 10 comparable utilities. So it's important because the lessons learned and the strategies and the best practices from these other comparable cities are something that we can learn from and borrow from as our study continues and as we start to evaluate other rate structure alternatives. So for example, as you'll hear, most surveyed utilities have implemented a customer assistance program to better assist their low-income customers. They've also, many of them, in fact, all of them, have implemented a fixed charge as part of their rate structure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And so the report also provides a deep understanding into the why of each utility's rate structure, meaning how the structures can help utilities address key challenges, whether it's resiliency or affordability, and how each utility also arrived at their current rate structure. So what was the process that they followed to actually implement those rate structures? Next slide, please. So the first step in the process that we followed for this report was to come up with the selection criteria. What criteria do we want to use to actually select the utilities? So those are shown here. We wanted a utility that has a large urban population so that it's comparable to New York. We also wanted utilities that have populations of low-income customers and maybe have affordability concerns. Also high cost of living. Obviously, that's something that we deal with here in New York. Also, coastal cities with resiliency challenges. So again, making sure that it's comparable to what we're facing here. Also, utilities that provide water, sewer, and stormwater service that have potentially implemented a stormwater charge, implemented customer affordability programming, and that perhaps the utility faces regulatory challenges like a long-term control plan, for example. So it's important to note that not all utilities meet all of these criteria, but they do meet most of them. And amongst all of the 10 utilities, all of these criteria are covered. Next slide, please. So I believe we showed this slide during the kickoff, but these are the 10 cities that we went with, and they are Atlanta, Baltimore, Fort Lauderdale, Houston, Ithaca, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, Tampa, and Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. So after we selected the utilities, I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach and data collection. So the data was collected from available online sources on the features of each utility's rate structure, including rates and charges imposed by each utility. So the detailed rates of each city are actually included in Appendix A in the report. So there's a really good comparison to show you how much rates are in other cities. Also, we conducted interviews with the majority of the utilities, 8 out of 10, to better understand the key challenges that they face, to hear directly from them on how they arrived at their current rate structure, and lessons learned about rate structure modifications and implementation. And the actual interview questions that we asked each utility are also included in the report as part of Appendix C. Next slide, please. So just to kick things off, again, this broad strokes overview of the report. So this slide just shows a very high level summary of the comparison. So as shown, all surveyed utilities have implemented fixed charges as shown in the first column here. So a fixed charge can be structured in many different ways, and the report details how each of the utilities have structured their fixed charges. But in a nutshell, what a fixed charge is it means that it's based on something other than the volume of water that a customer uses. For example, a fixed charge could be based on the cost that a utility pays to repair and replace water meters. So it's kind of like an infrastructure-based charge, rather than a volumetric charge, which is based on how much water a customer uses. So the survey cities all reported that including a fixed charge in their rate structure was helpful in keeping stability within their revenue stream. And then similarly, the majority of utilities have implemented a stormwater charge and have a customer assistance program, or CAP. So the report details how each utility, again, structures their stormwater charges. For example, some can be based on a parcel's imperviousness. And the report outlines how each utility's customer assistance program is structured and their best practices for assisting low-income customers. In other words, what programs make most sense for reaching some of those customers that are harder to reach and that need the most assistance. And then just looking at population and median household income, or MHI, as a benchmark. So New York City has the 4th highest median household income, or MHI, behind San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. and we have the highest population. Next slide, please. So now just a brief overview and summary of the rate structure options. So multiple rate structure options, including fixed charges, stormwater charges, development investment charges, and affordability driven rates will be analyzed under our study. So we wanted to, again, choose utilities that have implemented these types of rates as well. And you can see here, again, that all utilities have implemented a fixed charge. Many have implemented a stormwater charge. Some have implemented a development investment charge, and a few have also focused on affordability in their rate design. This confirms for us that studying fixed charges, stormwater charges, development investment charges, and affordability is consistent with not just these utilities that have been surveyed, but also others across the country, and that these approaches do appear to be some of the best practices out there for utilities. Next slide, please. So now just some broad strokes with assistance options. So customer assistance programs, or CAPs, were again compared across utilities. And we saw that most utilities have implemented a CAP to better assist their low-income customers. So a little bit about what these different types of CAPs are. So beginning with a bill discount. So a bill discount provides an ongoing reduction on a customer's bill. They can include fixed discounts, charge waivers, or percentage reductions. And then there's also something called income-based rates, which have been implemented by Philadelphia, which fall into this category. And then flexible terms is another way to go, and that helps customers afford services and pays bills through arrearage forgiveness, bill timing adjustment, or payment plans. So basically just more flexible terms on how and when you pay your bill. And then temporary assistance programs provide short-term or one-term basis assistance to prevent things like disconnection or interruption to service. So that's a third way to go. And then finally, with water efficiency, those are programs that offer a way for households to reduce their water bills, whether it's using water efficiency measures and the utility providing financial assistance for things like leak repairs, or offering rebates for conservation measures like water conserving fixtures, appliances, etc. And so more specific details on the ins and outs of these CAPs are included in the report. But again, we encourage you to ask any questions or leave us with any comments as well during the Q&A. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to take a look at each utility, utility by utility, and the challenges and approach that they've taken. So beginning with Fort Lauderdale. So some of the challenges that they face are significant capital funding needs due to aging infrastructure. They have also a growth in system demand, so meaning they have people using more water. And they also are dealing with climate change. Specifically, they're dealing with flooding from sea level rise. So their approach has been to take a long-term approach to financial planning, meaning looking many years out to better plan for their finances. They also are implementing a stormwater charge based on gross parcel area and number of vehicle trips. So this is a little bit of a different approach than what some utilities take for a stormwater charge. Typically they're based on imperviousness, but Fort Lauderdale has a different approach, which we're happy to answer questions on as well. For Tampa, Florida, their challenges are also aging infrastructure, and they also have a high number of water main breaks. So what they did was something unique. They adopted a 20-year rate plan based on infrastructure needs that were identified in engineering studies. So they're taking a 20-year look at what the rates will be. They also have a water and sewer fixed charge and increase those annually. And then for Washington, D.C., the challenges that they face are aging infrastructure and complying with the combined sewer overflow or CSO consent decree. So what they've done is they also have a water and sewer fixed charge, and they also have lifeline rates for single family customers to help with affordability. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on with Baltimore, Maryland. So the challenges that they face are aging infrastructure and also repair, replacement, and improvement of their utility systems. So again, very focused on aging infrastructure and infrastructure upgrade. So what they've done is they've taken a stepwise approach to rate structure modification, going step by step, starting with the stormwater charge, and then going to fixed charges, including a dedicated infrastructure charge to help fund some of those infrastructure improvements that they need. In San Francisco, their challenges are increased flooding events. They think that they may soon have a combined sewer consent decree coming down, and then also aging infrastructure. So their approach has been to have an 8% annual water and sewer rate increase annually to get the revenue that they need for this programming. And then they also are planning to start a stormwater charge as well. In Seattle, their challenges are climate change and also drought. So they're dealing with water supply issues. And so their approach has been to have a water conservation driven inclining block rate structure, which basically means the more water you use, the more money you pay. And they also are using a stormwater charge as well. And then for Houston, their challenges are aging infrastructure, limited funding for required investments, and also customer affordability. So what they've done is they have a unique rate structure with a reduced rate for the first 1,000 gallons per month for single family customers, meaning the first 1,000 gallons that you use each month are at a reduced rate. And then if you use above 1,000 gallons, then it's more expensive than that reduced rate. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to round things out, the last three utilities, starting with Ithaca. So Ithaca's challenge is that they are unable to generate adequate funding to maintain their infrastructure. And so their approach has been a stormwater charge and not using the city's general fund to help fund infrastructure projects. So it gives them more flexibility and also more revenue base. In Atlanta, their challenges are water supply and the need to generate additional revenue from high consumption customers. So their approach has been to actually hold rates steady because they get additional revenue coming in from municipal sales tax. So because they have that tax money coming in, they're able to keep rates the same, which makes it affordable for their customers. And then finally, rounding things out, we have Philadelphia, and their challenges are customer affordability and funding infrastructure. So their approach has been also a stormwater charge and then a tiered customer assistance program. Next slide, please. All right, so this next slide just again shows some of the high level takeaways that we have from the report that we feel are very compelling. So again, we see that fixed charges are very common. They're a very common industry practice. Again, they provide revenue stability when water usage fluctuates year over year and decreases over time. We also heard from the utilities that long-term financial planning is critical. So it can help utilities to communicate long-term needs, and also multi-year rate plans provide transparency as they look out, 5, 10, and even 20 years in that one case. And then we also found that stormwater charges can potentially provide benefits. So it could create a dedicated funding source for stormwater related costs. And the costs can be correlated to the use of the stormwater system. For example, with an impervious area, if it's based on the imperviousness of a parcel, then it's equitable to the stormwater runoff from that parcel. And you can also implement those alongside a credit program to recognize stormwater management practices. Also, we found on the customer affordability side that lifeline rate structures can be effective tools for customer affordability. And again, the lifeline rate is where it's a reduced rate for the first 1,000 gallons per month. And this can help offset rate increases for low income customers. And then we also heard from the utilities that successful rate structure changes require significant planning. So many of these rate structure options that I've talked about today and that these utilities have implemented over time have taken time to implement, in some cases years. And what they've told us is that stakeholder involvement and outreach is cited as critical, especially when you're creating new charges or you're changing your rate structure. Next slide, please. All right, so also some takeaways with customer assistance. So low enrollment rates are common. Many utilities cited that there are barriers for their customers to sign up for the programs that they offered. And so it's really important for utilities to understand what those barriers are and to mitigate those barriers and change your programs accordingly. So one suggestion is that utilities can provide multiple ways to enroll or even use self-verification to combat those challenges. Also, identify vulnerable populations and develop assistance programs accordingly was another suggestion from the utilities. So income eligibility thresholds should can account for non-discretionary costs. And also utilities with high renter populations can also work to establish targeted programs, which is applicable here in New York. Also, multiple programs can address different needs. So utilities can offer flexible payment plans and emergency assistance, and just a sort of a variety of programs. And they can also be tiered to make sure that the larger discounts are going to the lowest income customers and those who need it the most. Also, we heard that establishing partnerships for assistance program outreach makes a difference. So for example, utilities can partner with other agencies that administer other assistance programs to reach more customers, which is something that we do here in New York. And then finally, successful customer assistance programs build over time. So this means that longstanding programs tend to have higher enrollment rates. So it's important here again to note that the success of these programs is really contingent upon time and learning from lessons and building them over time. Next slide, please. All right, so just a quick look too at, as I end my part of the presentation, looking at the schedule ahead for our upcoming advisory group meetings. So our third meeting, we will plan to have between February and April of 2022. So that is next year. And it's going to cover an update on the Unified Stormwater Rule and also a summary on the 20-year revenue requirements analysis that will be completed next month, as I mentioned. So, and again, if there's interest, we can continue discussing the rate report in the next meeting as well. You know, to that end, we'd be interested in your input on the rate structures covered in the comparative report. Specifically, are there specific components that you like the most or that you're interested in? You know, which rate options that the other utilities have implemented seem that you're most interested in or that they could be the best? And also, are there additional rate structure options that you think would be useful to be explored? So we definitely want to hear feedback on the report and the content of the report. All right, and so then meeting number 4 would be in October of 2022, where we would look at potential rate structure options and costs included in rate structure components. Meeting 5 would be in March of 2023, looking at customer impacts, affordability, and implementation options. And then meeting 6 would be final recommendations in June of 2023. And again, these are all subject to change as the study continues. And as we get feedback from you, we can change the topics or we can add to the topics as well to make sure that they're most useful to you. And with that, I believe that wraps up my part of the presentation. But I think we are going to Q&A. Is that right, Mikkel?
Yeah, we can certainly stop and take a couple of questions now. And I'm gonna go over to the chat and just call on folks that are most appropriate for responses. So the first one from Jared, I think is in regards to Angela's opening about the IDA response and exploring strategies in Corona near Lefrak. Jared, we definitely agree with you that the area where our office is located is a challenging spot. You know, we certainly had some flooding damage in the building that we are tenants in. And so as we look at the cloudburst neighborhoods that Angela referenced, we are looking at the city holistically, and we expect to, by the end of the year, have a series of strategies ready to identify our cloudburst neighborhoods. So we can certainly keep everyone in this advisory group updated on that progress. The next question is about the new online system and whether it can be adapted to show.
Mikkel,
Yes.
it's Angela. May I please add to that a little?
Yes, please. Thank you,
It's
Angela.
okay, great. Yeah, so thank you so much for your question. We are working really hard now to develop a framework for the selection of our cloudburst neighborhoods. I wish I could say there wasn't a lot of competition, but there is. And we will be looking to a number of very specific pieces of information. So we will be looking at our projections on increased precipitation and sea level rise, and where we see the potential and the probability of this increased flooding. And clearly we will be looking at our experiences. So thank you for raising that point about this location. We will be looking at the potential for those areas to have some social injustice ramifications as well. We want to make sure that we're fairly looking at all of the neighborhoods through a variety of lenses, and we want to very specifically look at the opportunities in that area, really making sure that when we move from sort of the desktop and the identification of vulnerable neighborhoods, that we actually have the opportunities to engineer and select tools to manage those vulnerabilities and risks. So please stay tuned. We will definitely have a different forum to communicate to the public on this important work. I'm sorry, Mikkel, thank you. I just wanted to get that in.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Angela. The next question is about the online system and whether it can be adapted to show daily meter reads and not just consumption. And I apologize, but I don't have a member of our customer service team on the call right now, but I can assure you that we will include a written response to this question in our FAQs and can also follow up with you directly. Erin, I think that the next couple of questions are specifically about the comparative analysis. So I'm going to kick these over to you. The first one is about multifamily buildings with low-income tenants and whether they would qualify for low-income discounts, and also a question about senior citizen discounts.
Great. Yeah, so we currently have affordability programs that we administer, and senior citizens and multifamily customers are certainly included in those. And the rate structure study that we're doing now is going to assess a variety of affordability options that do look at those populations as well. And, we can't stress enough that we've heard from the utilities the importance of affordability programs and just how important it is as part of a rate structure. So it's definitely something that is top of mind to us. And I should say, though, that we do have affordability programming on the books that does reach many of our customers. And I think we would be able to provide some more information on that in the FAQs.
Great, thank you. The next question, sorry, I'm scrolling down a little bit. Oh, it's actually from Shino. She's asking about how other cities manage affordability for low-income renters, especially when water bill costs are passed on to renters via rent payments.
That's a great question. And I'm going to actually call in our reinforcements and our technical team from our consultants. I believe Janet Clements is on the line from Corona Consulting. Janet, could you speak to one of the examples that we looked at in the comparative analysis where there is a city that has a high renter population and how they're able to pass on some of that affordability to renters?
Sure. This is a great question, and one that a lot of utilities are still trying to kind of crack open how to address this challenge. There are some great examples from different places across the country. Seattle Public Utilities, for example, offers a program where they kind of provide for renters. They have a program that offers a kind of flat discount rate through their energy bill because a much higher percentage of renters pay for energy compared to water and sewer bills. They've experimented also in the past with vouchers, and I know that DC Water is experimenting with a program that kind of gives landlords a discount and passes it on to the renters. So we're watching that carefully as well. New York City has you guys have a great program that offers kind of discounts related to affordable housing, and Erin, you can expand on that, but that's also a model that a lot of people are looking at. So a variety of approaches. Some renters do pay a bill directly, and more utilities are opening up programs, I think, to those folks as well.
Great, thank you. We have a question from EDC. Erin, I'm going to put this to you. Does DEP have initial ideas around what types of projects a potential stormwater charge could or would fund if implemented? Is the assumption that revenue raised would supplement revenue from the water board?
Yep, that's a great question. And I don't think that we are there yet. I'm happy to have others chime in on this, but I think that is still something that we are looking into.
Thank you. And the next question from Rose is, will property owners still need water sewer insurance, or will the new rate structure cover this? That's also a great question, Rose. It's really too early to say because at this point in the study, we have not yet made a recommendation on what a new rate structure could be. We're assessing a variety of structures. And so the question of property owner insurance will be looked at under this study. And we would certainly look forward to hearing feedback from you and from the rest of the advisory group and getting your thoughts about insurance coverage. So I just want to be sensitive to time and actually introduce Alan Cohn to go through the next section of our presentation. But folks, please feel free to continue to put questions into the chat. Anything that we get today will also be addressed in our FAQ, which will be available on the website as well. So thank you, Alan.
Great, thanks, Mikkel. Just let me know if my audio isn't coming through. So, in the context of what we heard from Erin on the challenges in other cities and how they've structured their rates accordingly, I know we're all starting to think about how that fits within our own context for the challenges and the opportunities in New York City. So I wanted to introduce a new effort that we're working on called One Water. And some of you may be familiar with this concept of One Water. You may have participated in the webinar we held in September, but I'm going to provide a brief overview today, as well as recap what we heard in that webinar, which is also recorded on our website. So I'll provide a link at the end of this. So One Water is a holistic approach to water management that requires looking at the water system in its entirety, considering the current and the future needs of all its users and balancing them with future spending commitments to preserve affordability. Cities across the country have really embraced the One Water approach as part of their long-term planning efforts. So while we've applied a holistic lens to many of our programs, including the green infrastructure program shown here, we're starting to assess what it might mean, what One Water might mean for us moving forward in the context of holistic emerging challenges and opportunities. So looking at the broader context of what New York City's priorities may be. Next slide, please. Okay, so broader stakeholder engagement is integral to our effort. We want to represent multiple objectives in the formulation of our One Water approach. So of course, equity and affordability are one of the key priorities. A One Water approach seeks to optimize capital spending by pooling resources to address multiple needs and goals simultaneously. These goals include, but are not limited to, the ones you see here: water quality improvement, resiliency and emergency response, environmental sustainability, infrastructure reliability, workforce development. And so we're using this One Water approach to solicit feedback on what are these priorities moving forward. We see a lot of opportunities for synergies and really want to understand how we can embrace this approach in our planning processes. Next slide, please. So, I think it's worth noting that One Water planning is not entirely new for New York City. We haven't necessarily called it that, but it's a way to leverage and build upon a lot of what we've already done and apply these new lenses to our planning efforts. We've had many plans and programs over the years that have taken a forward-looking, holistic approach. And through these projects, we've seen the benefits of working collaboratively with our stakeholders and the opportunities for advancing our objectives as cost-effectively as possible. Moving forward, we can review our programs through the multiple lenses described in the previous slide, as well as through the feedback we receive from our stakeholders, and determine where these future opportunities lie. To get a sense of how other cities have gone through this process, as I mentioned, we look to Los Angeles, which has been one of the premier One Water programs in the country. Next slide, please. So in our September webinar, we featured Asia Jackson, who's an environmental engineer with the LA Department of Sanitation and Environment, to share their One Water journey, including its drivers, stakeholder process, and timeline. One notable difference is that One Water LA is driven by water scarcity. While we have to consider the potential for droughts in New York City, of course, our process will more likely be driven by an abundance of water. As we saw during Ida, sometimes that's too much water. However, Asia presented that there are some key similarities between our cities and advantages of the One Water process that we can learn from for discussing multiple objectives and for bringing different perspectives and stakeholders to the table. Next slide, please. So Los Angeles, of course, has many of the same elements that we'll consider here. That's drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, with one key difference in that the jurisdiction is much more spread out over different agencies and municipalities. So here we actually have the advantage of having everything under one umbrella at DEP. Groundwater and recycled water are key facets of One Water LA, and that's in order to optimize their drinking water supply. And so while those don't play a prominent role in New York City, we can consider opportunities such as on-site water reuse and water recirculation systems to offset potable water used for non-potable purposes, and how that in turn can reduce flow to our sewers and wastewater facilities. Next slide, please. So one of the main takeaways, and this is my final slide on this topic, one of the main takeaways from LA's presentation is that there is no linear path to One Water, but rather that it's an ongoing process. So Los Angeles marked the beginning of their One Water timeline with their integrated resources plan in 1999, which evolved into One Water LA starting in 2013. 2017, they issued their One Water LA plan, setting 2040 as the milepost for reaching the goals. established in that plan. So as we embark on our own One Water process, we will assess our existing goals and consider gaps and opportunities and think about both the past plans and efforts that have led into our own One Water timeline and where we will look to move forward in the future. Next slide, please. So we would like to hear your thoughts on what One Water could mean in New York City. We've established this new webpage and email address and plan to have more informational and learning webinars. If you didn't receive the invitation for the last webinar and would like to be invited to the next one and any future meetings, please email us with your contact information. We'll be sure to keep this group posted on future developments in our One Water process and look forward to receiving your feedback. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mikkel or Michael.
Still me. Thanks, Alan. Before we go on to our resources and next steps, I do want to go back to the chat box and take a couple of more questions. The next one is from Mike Dulong, and he's saying, Lifeline rates are a valuable tool to improve low-income affordability. However, an important critique of the approach is that it does not account for household size, which affects the amount of water needed to meet essential needs. Low-income households may be disproportionately likely to have more people in a single housing unit. Will the rate study examine how to design a Lifeline rate that takes account of household size? Erin, can you take that one, please?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that question. Great point. And I think the short answer is yes, that when we look at the variety of affordability programming out there, we are going to look at household size. And I will turn it to Janet Clements or our folks from Stantec if you had anything to add about some of those details and how maybe other utilities look at household size as part of their lifeline rate.
Hey, Aaron, this is Dave Heider with Stantec. I can jump on that one. It is a true, one of the downsides, as mentioned, of a Lifeline rate is it is kind of a brute force approach in that you're essentially offering it to everybody. So everybody gets that quantity of water at a discounted rate. And it is challenging, I will say, to design that to take into account household size just because of the administrative burden of trying to manage that as well as having the data to be able to support it. So oftentimes a Lifeline rate structure will be, one tool in the toolbox to target maybe just single family, realizing that it doesn't address those with larger household sizes. And then another tool in the toolbox would be, the affordability program to support those that qualify for the low income assistance and things like that. So outside of a very complicated, almost like water budget individual rate structure for every single customer, it is difficult to have that be targeted. It is more of a brute force approach.
Great, thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, this next question is for you and One Water NYC and thinking about integrated planning. Is DEP considering the energy water nexus? Can DEP pursue supporting thermal energy networks? King County and Seattle has an approach that's supporting building decarbonization. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We've definitely looked at the water energy nexus in the past in terms of how our sustainability programs are linked to energy and greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, how does water conservation affect pumping and treatment at our drinking water facilities and our wastewater facilities? Similarly, what impact does green infrastructure have on reduced pumping and treatment at wastewater treatment plants? And I believe some of our colleagues in DEP's Office of Energy and Resource Recovery are also involved in some work looking at the thermal recovery potential not just at our wastewater treatment plants. That's ongoing work that they've been doing, but also more decentralized approaches. So we'll certainly take that into consideration moving forward and how we can build upon those efforts.
Thanks, Alan. The next question is another one from Mike. He says, the report states that careful consideration and research will be necessary should DEP choose to implement a stormwater charge. Will this research be incorporated into the SRSA study, or is DEP indicating some sort of supplemental research will be necessary? The Water Board's authority to restructure its fees to account for stormwater collection and treatment is well established in the Public Authorities Law. Mike, I'm going to skip quoting the whole title. And so if anything, DEP should be examining whether it would be arbitrary and capricious not to assess a stormwater fee. So thank you for this question. I know this got a little bit confusing. When you refer to the report, I think that you're referring to the new normal report that came out after Ida, but correct me if you're referring to a different one. I do want to be clear, though, that the rate structure study will be assessing a stormwater charge. And so as Aaron walked through with the comparative analysis of other utilities, first we're looking at utilities that also have stormwater charges. As we go into the revenue requirements phase and then looking across different rate structure options, we know that a stormwater charge will be one of the ones that we are assessing. So hopefully we're clear on that it is included in the rate structure study. There is not a separate research effort. We're including everything, all of the different rate structure options that we're looking at in this one study, so that as it concludes, we have a good sense of options while making recommendations. Angela, I don't know if you might have anything else to add on to that in terms of the stormwater charge discussion.
No, I think that covers it fairly well. There's a legal question embedded here that I don't want to address that we will be consulting with our counsel on. So other than to say that, we're very interested in how a stormwater charge can benefit the utility and our needs. And at the same time, I don't want to prejudge, the outcome. So we're very invested in what we call a holistic rate structure change, which is one that collectively will benefit the system. So we need to be able to check multiple boxes, including the concerns regarding vulnerability with respect to precipitation and ever-changing climate events.
Thanks, Angela. I see. So thanks, Mike and Shino, for clarifying that that's coming from the comparative rate structure analysis. Aaron, I don't know if you want to speak to that in terms of the fact that this analysis is a part of the same rate structure study, or if that's clear now.
Yeah, thank you again, Shino, for pointing out that that's in the report. So, I think Angela alluded to this careful consideration. She brought up the legal perspective. So I think when we're talking about careful consideration and research, that's one example of something that we'll need to look at. So, but as Mikkel mentioned, there's not a separate effort. We are looking at multiple rate structure options, including the stormwater charge under the sustainable rate structure analysis. So hopefully that helps clarify.
Great, thank you. At this point, it looks like we've slowed down on questions. So I do want to go over to the next slide to talk about our resources and next steps. Miranda, can you change the slide, please? Perfect, thank you. So our next steps, we're planning for our next meeting to take place in early 2022. So sometime between February and April, depending on the timing for the continued analysis. So please keep an eye out for the next invitation on that. As a reminder, we do have a separate webpage with a lot of information about the rate structure study, including the comparative analysis report that Erin gave us an overview of today. And clearly some members of the advisory group have already started digging into. And so, you know, if you have additional questions as you review the report, you can feel free to send them over to us, because we will continue to update our frequently asked questions. So that is a document that's currently on the website that has all of the questions that we received at the last meeting and others received in between meetings. And so we see that as an iterative document that we will continue to update as questions and comments come through. So on that note, I will say thank you all for joining us. We're ending a little bit early. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I know that there's a few folks that will already be following up directly, but we will send you off and say thank you for joining us. Oh, and as a reminder, both the slides and a recording of today's presentation will also be available on that SRSA website. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.